depending on where you're joining from today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. And we wanted to have a live stream session here on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, which is where we're streaming today. Wanted to have a live stream session to talk about digital transformation in Asia Pacific and really hone in on that region and some of the nuances and best practices and lessons learned for digital transformations in the Asia Pacific region. And with me, I have a guest from our office in Asia Pacific who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. So I won't ruin the surprise yet by telling you who it is, but you can see him in front of you, obviously, and we'll let him introduce himself here in just a moment. But before we do that, I would like to ask the audience a couple things. First of all, this is a unique format where we try to get as much audience feedback and questions and participation as possible. So if you have questions for my guest or I or both of us, please feel free to drop those in the chat as we go here, as we get going in the conversation. I'm going to start with some questions I have, but I'd love to hear any feedback or questions that the audience has as well. And certainly if you have feedback or answers to some of the questions or topics we're discussing, or you have additional thoughts, we'd love to hear that as well. So we'll try to make this as engaging and interactive as possible. And then secondly, if you could just drop in the chat where you're joining from this morning, I'd love to hear what part of the world you're in. Like I said, this live stream is intended to be for those in Asia Pacific, but we certainly welcome anyone from the Americas or Europe or Africa or anywhere else in the world that you might be, and love to hear a global perspective. So we'd love to hear where you're from. So if you could just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining us from today, that will help us understand our audience a little bit better here today. So like I said, today's conversation is meant to really dive into digital transformation best practices, particularly focusing on what some of the nuances and lessons learned are from digital transformations in Asia Pacific. And with me today, we have Dean Sam, who is with Third Stage Consulting Asia Pacific, based out of Hong Kong. So Dean, welcome to our live stream today.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And I guess just to get started, just so the audience understands who you are, maybe tell us a little bit about what it is you do at Third Stage, and then I'm going to come back and ask you some more earlier questions about how you got started in your career earlier on.
Yeah, sure. So I'm based out of Hong Kong. Been part of Third Stage just for under a year now. We got started with a first project in Hong Kong with a energy provider in Hong Kong. It was a first good endeavor, first great experience with Third Stage, and I've been part of the Third Stage family since then. And just want to mention that I've been a big fan of Third Stage since the very beginnings of the company 4 or 5 years ago, when I was an ERP implementation practitioner. Following you, Eric, your stratospheres, your YouTubes, and it's quite surreal to be on a live stream with you right now.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and it's funny you say that because that's how you and I met, was over social media, and I knew who you were, just as you knew who I was. I recognized your name, and when we were looking for sort of a key team member in Asia Pacific, you were the first person that came to mind. So. It's funny how it's a large world, but it's also a very small world too in today's day and age. Social media.
Yeah, and the timing was great as well. I just came back from a long project in Canada. I just got back to Hong Kong, and just a few weeks later, you reached out to me. So it couldn't have worked out any better.
Yeah, very good timing for sure. And prior to us crossing paths in that way, and you formally becoming part of the Third Stage team, this certainly is not your first job. You've been doing stuff leading up to you joining the company, but maybe tell us a little bit about your background. How did you start out in consulting, and what have you done since that time leading up to joining Third Stage?
Sure. Yeah. So, well, I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. That's where I grew up. I studied, and right after finishing my engineering school, I really wanted to explore and actually go to Asia. And I actually went there to actually study Chinese, and I did that for 2 full years to learn Mandarin. and really loved the region, the area. And I thought that was there's a lot of opportunities in Asia at that time, and there still is, of course. And I decided to start my career there, and got into consulting very quickly as my first real professional job in Shanghai. I was actually working under two consultants who were partners in their respective firms in Accenture and Bain and Company, who actually got together and started their own firm in Shanghai. So got my experience from them. So working with some top consultants. So it was a good. I got a good foundation there. Worked for them for a few years. Then I got this opportunity to move to Bangladesh in Dhaka, and I've been there. I was there for 7 years, and one of my biggest, I guess, postings there was to lead and spearhead a big change management and ERP implementation for a textile company. I spent almost 6 years there, restructuring the organization, setting up the right processes, evaluating what are the different types of solutions out there, what is the best solution that fits the needs of the actual organization. So it was a full-blown change management and restructuring, with the goal to set up a standard ERP. And that was a big challenge, and that allowed me to really gain that end-to-end view of what it takes to implement technology, not just on the technology, on the solution side, but on the people side, on the competency side, on setting up the best practices, training the people, and hiring people as well. Want people who can understand the value of information, and following, and who understand best practices, because we all know ERP is set up based on best practices. So that was a great learning experience for me, and thanks to Third Stage, what you're putting out there, Eric, that during that time, that allowed me to gain some knowledge, and get some inputs on how to go about a digital transformation initiative. And what I really understood is it's really a people problem, or it's a really, it has to do with the people. It has to do with roles and responsibilities, less so than just buying a technology and getting consultants in and doing the job for you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think there's, when you look at digital transformations in any part of the world, regardless of where you might be, there's certain commonalities or similarities with successful digital transformations, but there's also unique cultural nuances or differences between a digital transformation that might affect people in Asia Pacific versus Europe or Africa or any other part of the world. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, what in your career, because you have that multinational career, you've been in different parts of the world working on digital transformations and ERP implementations. What do you see as some of the biggest differences in managing or being a part of a digital transformation in Asia Pacific compared to other parts of the world that you've worked in?
Well, the organizations that I've been part of, both, let's say, in the US, in Canada, or in Asia, whether it's in Bangladesh, where I was, or in China, or in Southern Asia, I think what we found out is, in Asia, you see a lot of mother companies who have purchased or acquired different subsidiaries over time, and these subsidiaries are actually different businesses. And one of the challenges that when you deal with these clients, is to be able to try to help them consolidate their business model. Although their different subsidiaries can be operating differently, but it's also worth looking at what are the consolidation opportunities that they can get, whether it's on the financial consolidation piece, or whether it's on the sales and marketing, whether different to define the different synergies that can exist between the different subsidiaries, to help their market. So it's looking at at the overall picture, right, of the organization, and not just looking at different businesses in silos. And I think at third stage we do a good job to really understand the different dynamics that exist in this particular organization, and to find the connecting factors that can help connect these different subsidiaries under one umbrella.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And you mentioned one thing with digital transformations in Asia Pacific is and I think you may have alluded to this a little bit, is sometimes the impact can be different, from a cultural perspective. Are there any differences you see in terms of just the cultural impact that digital transformation might have on an organization or a team that's in Asia Pacific versus other parts of the world?
Well, I would say from my experience, several organizations that I've been interfacing in the region, a lot of companies are very execution based, right? And in order to, let's say, to get into that digital transformation, let alone the ERP kind of system, is you need to build that planning infrastructure. So you need to, sort of a bit step out from that execution level where you have like only a couple of weeks planning window, but to look a bit further beyond that horizon, and build an infrastructure, build a team that doesn't execute, but that really looks at the information, that collects the information, that compiles it, that analyzes it to make the right decisions, to plan. And then with a right planning output, then the execution team can start, can perform the task at hand, and they do it much smoothly because it's developing that planning structure above that execution. Oftentimes what I see in the region is, but the execution teams in organizations are really, really strong. They work really hard. They put to meet customer demands and forth. But just by adding that planning layer on top of it, that can bring a lot of benefits to the organization, and allow the company to.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that I think organizations and teams in any part of the world could really benefit from, that sort of lesson or
I
best
think so,
practice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that also in companies, not just in Asia.
Yeah. Yeah, but maybe it's something, and I'm always fascinated, and you've been very good at helping me understand some of the nuances in terms of when we're interacting with our clients in Asia Pacific. You've been good at coaching me on sort of the cultural ways to navigate, the differences between just Western culture and some of the cultures in Asia Pacific. Do you think that culturally in different parts of the world that there are different propensities or likelihood or different tendencies to want to do more or less planning like you're suggesting here? Do you think that's a cultural thing? Like some cultures in the world want to plan more, it comes more naturally, but other cultures maybe just want to go straight to execution? Or what do you think drives that?
I think it's just a bit of knowledge transfer that's required. Really, it's not just if they knew, if they had a good idea of what it takes to plan, what are the right the foundations that you need, the right nuts and bolts required to plan, they would do it. So it's just providing that level of knowledge, those extra processes to put in place, the extra pieces of information that need to connect together in order to perform proper planning, whether it's material planning, it's capacity planning, it's demand planning, and so forth. It's just giving that those extra instructions, I would say. And then once you give that, teams usually they accept it, and they use it for their own benefit.
Right. Yeah. Very good. So when it comes to your work at Third Stage and advising some of our clients in the Asia Pacific region there, what do you enjoy? What is it you enjoy most about the type of work that you're doing with these clients?
Well, really, I really enjoy the fact that I'm helping organizations get better.
Mm,
That's deep down. That's it brings a lot of satisfaction to me that I know that uh, I'm I'm able to contribute somehow to help the organization, not in a specific department or a specific need in terms of having to um, fulfill customer needs or customer demands, but more on on the holistic management point of view. Trying to connect dots between the different functional units of the organizations. To create those different synergies, connecting different information streams. So those that's I really enjoy that, and we of course we perform a lot of workshops with our clients, whether it's with functional teams, the execution teams, the planning teams, and as well with the board of directors and the senior management. And I really enjoy preparing, running these workshops and gathering their inputs, right? Because they're the ones who know the business the best, and they're the best ones to talk about it. But what I enjoy is after the workshop is actually compiling the notes that we've taken, listening again to those workshops of whatever they said, and taking notes, and then from those notes connecting what's the right, what's the right way forward for them, and presenting that to them in the next meeting. So that's the greatest satisfaction that I get, because I mean, we won't reinvent their business. I think our job is to take what they know about their business, or what they think, what they believe is right for the business, but trying to show it in a way where it's consumable, where we can break it down into parts, and show how we can go about it. And that's what I love about what I'm doing right now.
right, right. Well, good. Well, that is exciting. That's part of what makes consulting fun for sure. I wanted to come back to the previous point. You were talking about planning, and we actually have an audience question that I wanted to show you here and to get to. And this is from Glass on YouTube. And Glass asks, "Can you explain how execution feeds back into planning, and how you might adjust your planning methodologies to reflect the realities of execution?" So that's a nice way to tie together the point you were making before of the making sure you take the time to do the planning. Certainly, execution is important, but how do those two things? How do you tie those two things together?
Right. Well, that's a great question. So if you want, I mean, yes, we all know planning feeds into execution, but you also need that execution bit to feed into planning. Well, one thing is, you need to capture the execution data, right? And in real time, if it's in real time, the better it is. So the planner can react better and adjust his plan. So let's say if we're talking about manufacturing, to have a good manufacturing execution system, right? To be able to track inventory in real time, to track production in real time, to track capacity in real time, to track shutdowns, maintenance shutdowns in real time. So that information can feed back into planning for that next to adjust the next planning cycle. And I believe another piece of it is more on the improvement side of it, right? So for example, if you're implementing an ERP, what you should be looking at is the reporting piece, and trying to evaluate what happened between plan and actual, right? And evaluate the variance between the two. And once you get that variance, then you see how to better plan and even how to better execute. So because both areas you can improve
Right.
simultaneously, but how you improve that is you can correlate the two of them together, develop those right reporting dashboards in order how plan and execution worked out in relations to one another. and then and then you will get the most out of your information.
Right. Yeah, makes total sense. And they have to be aligned, and they have to integrate, and feed one another for sure when you're talking about planning and execution. And in a similar follow up question, while we're on this topic here, this is from Kyler um, on LinkedIn, who asked, when working with multinational organizations, how do you effectively address individual cultures while keeping an aligned and standardized implementation strategy? And this is kind of an interesting, maybe even a broader question in terms of your operations, your the technologies you use. How do you leverage best practices and sort of repeatable processes, but at the same time balance the need to tailor those approaches or those implementation strategies for the unique cultural
Mhm,
considerations?
mhm.
How do you find that right balance, or what have you seen work in your career?
Well, I'm a big believer in the process ownership model.
Mm,
I really believe this is the next way forward in order to drive consistency of to operate throughout the businesses of in a multinational or multi sites, right? So what is a process ownership model really? So it's regardless is a process owner and who's looking after a specific process at all in all different well in all across all divisions or business units across the mother company. So is someone who's looking at after if the right processes, the right methodology is being put in place, and making sure that it's being done consistently throughout the organization.
mm,
And I believe this is a way to properly leverage value of your, let's say, your ERP system. Um, so having process consistency is great, and this is something, this is sort of like a buzzword that's been shared, for quite some time. But in order to make that happen, is you really need to have it becomes a person's issue, right? A people issue. So you need to have a person that's really responsible of that process, and who has also the seniority as well to ensure the functional teams are actually running that process as it should be across the globe.
right.
And now with new technologies such as process mining, uh, you process owners can have that visibility to track how processes are being performed across their business.
Right. Sort of along those lines, though, I have a question that your response just triggered another follow up question of mine, which is when you have certain cultures that are some cultures, as you know, are more hierarchical. They respect authority and they listen to authority and they want sort of strong authority from the top down. And then other cultures, that's not as well received, and it's more of a less of a hierarchy and more of a flat organizational structure. When you're dealing with differences like that, especially in the context of what you described with the process ownership and that sort of thing, does that change how you navigate that? When you're looking at sort of core fundamental differences in how people view authority and leadership roles and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think so, because when you're looking at a process ownership model, it becomes more cross-functional, right?
Right.
Because to have process ownership, you have to look at your organization as uh, in terms of end-to-end processes. And another term for end-to-end processes is cross-functional processes, right? It's not just a procurement department or sales department, um, a production department, a materials department. They are linked together in one streamlined process. And that process owner looks at that overall streamlined process, right? That cross-functional process. So therefore, yeah, the process owner has to be able to cut across these, I guess, these functional barriers, and to again to have that seniority level to work with the heads of these functional teams, to ensure the process is running smoothly.
Right.
Uh, Yeah, so having a hierarchical kind of organizational structure uh, could impede that kind of model. So it requires a bit of of tweaking, I guess, to have that process owner jump in to have a proper seat in that organizational structure to perform.
Right. Makes sense. And then a follow up, just building on that point, also from LinkedIn, is can you give an example of a process owner and who should own this? So in other words, who would own the process ownership or the process lead function?
Well, let's say if we are talking an example of a process owner, I mean, we're talking about the planning, building a planning infrastructure, and I believe that's where the first, well, let's say, the key process owners would come in, right? Because a process owner, where he would come in, is making sure you have different information streams uh, trying to, well, to consolidate in one common point to make the right decision. So the process owner has to make sure that all these different information streams are providing that information to, for example, the planner, right? So that would be an example of a process owner who's making sure that if you have information coming from the demand team, you have information coming from the procurement team, you have information coming from the uh, uh, production team, and so forth, from the costing team, you have all these information streams coming in. The process owner will make sure that information is coming in properly, so the planners can do their job. Really.
Right.
So basically, the process owner, what he's making sure is to remove all types of information bottlenecks that are happening in the process.
Right. Yeah.
So things can work smoothly, and no one's actually waiting for information to come to them so they can execute their task.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. And then something unrelated to planning and business process ownership is from Nav on LinkedIn, and he asks, "What are the most common signs that come up during ERP implementation that indicate it may not be as successful?" And I think this is probably a question that goes well beyond just Asia Pacific, but just in general. Or if you have any nuances or anything that's sort of unique to Asia Pacific, I'd love to hear that too. But otherwise, we could talk more generally about it.
And well, I would say, you know, when you the traditional way to look at ERP implementation, you build your as is process and then your to be process, and you start you by doing that, it's helpful because you start connecting the different departments together. Information's flowing across the organization, and yeah, and then you're able to you're able to deploy a system where it meets, you can say, the end-to-end piece of the organization from order to cash, for example. I think one area that's often missing is that reporting piece and that analytics piece. If you can do that, if you can design that ahead of time during your readiness stage, before you deploy your implementation, you'll get much more out of your ERP investment, I would say. So working with the executives and so forth, and building the analytics, the modeling, the type they like to develop in the company in order to make better strategic decisions later on. That's important because once you understand what you want to analyze, what you want to model about your business, you'll figure out, oh, we need this kind of information to model this information. And where does that information come from, though? That comes from your ERP implementation. So from your ERP. So therefore, oh, okay, good thing we didn't set up the ERP yet because we don't have that information. So then you can include that data set that you require for your analytics in your ERP processes. So it's very important to look at both ends. So you start from the process piece on how the organization should run, right, on the planning, on the functional level, but also look at the other end of the spectrum in terms of analytics and reporting, what you require, because that's also going to feed your ERP requirement needs.
Right. Yeah, makes total sense. Now, shifting gears a little bit, if we talk about specific technologies or types of technology, whether it's ERP like you've been talking about, or CRM, or artificial intelligence, business process mining. There's all these different tools out there that can enable a digital transformation. Are there certain trends or priorities that you see being different in Asia Pacific? So in other words, there's a predisposition towards certain types of technologies more commonly in Asia Pacific than what you might see or expect to see in other parts of the world, or is it more similar than I might think?
Well, I believe in Asia Pacific. Well, the clients that are approaching us, um, they're still very focused on implementing their ERP, whether it's it's their first time or they want to replace their current ERP, their legacy systems. I think that's the foundation with your ERP, and if you can leverage that to the fullest extent, then you can move on to the different other platforms that are out there. But the ERP is really the foundation of all, I guess, business management.
Right. What about the priorities or the things that drive companies?
Strategy.
Oh, I'm sorry, I lost you, Dean. I lost your audio there for a second. Can you repeat that last part again?
I think, well, our goal is to really build that digital strategy in order to really leverage that ERP piece. And once you have that ERP piece set, I think the sky's the limit afterwards
Yeah.
in terms of introducing other pieces of technology.
Right. What about the drivers or the priorities that are driving organizations to want to go through digital transformation, or the benefits they expect to get out of digital transformation? How is that different? Do you see, for example, in the United States and other parts of the world, it's very focused on how do I optimize efficiency and increase throughput, and it's about speed and lowering costs and things of that nature. Of course, every company is different, every organization is different, has their own priorities, but just in general, if you were to generalize, what are some of the priorities that might be a bit more unique or a little bit more of a focus with digital transformations, or the reasons for digital transformation in Asia Pacific compared to other parts of the world?
Well, I think yeah, just to be very, very, you just go back to basics. I mean, we don't want people just running around and looking for information to do their tasks. At the end of the
Right.
day, uh, this is what we want to achieve, right? And if you have that information visibility, that information accuracy, and that's in order to do that, you need to set the right organizational structure, the right roles and responsibilities and the right processes to achieve that. I think that's the biggest pain point uh, that should be eliminated in whether you're embarking in some sort of a digital strategy, and making sure that information is flowing smoothly, and building that, how to say, that digital mindset, right, in throughout the organization. I think that's key. People need to be sensitive about information. It's not just about doing work, but it's about getting the right information to do the right work. And I think once, if a company can build that culture of having, of throughout, top down in the organization, should be sensitive to the value of data and the value of information, that will go a long way for that digital transformation to occur.
Right. Yeah, that makes good sense. One of the things I've found throughout my career in different parts of the world, and in being involved with digital transformation in varying parts of the world, is that in some parts of the world you have relatively high labor costs where it's easier to justify the need to automate or the need to digitize the business. But then in other parts of the world, the labor costs are relatively low, especially if it's a company or if it's a parent company that's based in one of those higher cost locations. The cost of labor in some other countries might actually be so low that it's harder to justify larger investments in technology because you're not going to get as much benefit from automation, at least on the surface. Is that something you've seen in your career, or how have you, if you have, how have you navigated that?
Well, I've never heard a business owner say, I don't want to digitalize because it's expensive and because my labor cost is low and I'm happy with my margins. I think
Right.
any business any business owner, if they have a chance to improve their margins, regardless if they're doing well or not right now, I think they'll jump on that opportunity.
Right.
So I mean, I would see. I mean, coming from Bangladesh, spending 7 years there, where labor cost is very low compared to the rest of the world. You see a lot of business owners, a lot of managers who want to implement a digital system to connect their organization, to track to track their company processes and so forth. So no, there's a big propensity for business owners, especially let's say in the textile world, where labor, a lot of labor, well, you require a lot of labor. They still want to digitalize, because at the end of the day, they want to make their companies better, right? Um, and I believe an ERP, for example, is one of the, or probably in my opinion, the biggest initiative that they can undertake in order to improve their company drastically.
Yeah. Yeah. And case in point, or just to give a real life example for a client we have right now in Asia Pacific. I know you're based in Hong Kong, as we talked about, which in Asia Pacific is a relatively high cost part of the world. And then but you're working with a client in Papua New Guinea, which is a large organization in Papua New Guinea, where the labor costs and just overall costs are a bit lower. So that's, I guess, a good example that sort of validates your point, which is this organization is interested in automating their business and introducing new digital technologies, partially to increase efficiency and decrease costs. But I mean, there's other benefits as well, obviously. But I guess that's. Do you have any thoughts on that, or in that specific example or that specific client? Is that true? What you're saying as far as the need and the want to automate and save money and increase margins and all that stuff you just mentioned?
Yeah, all of that is true, is correct. I think, I mean, being a manager or an executive, your mission is to build and improve a well-run machine, right?
Right.
Regardless, you're making money, of course, but you also want to see things flowing. Everything's in order. Everything's you know people know their roles, and they're executing it to a T and so forth. So there's no better way to do that by setting up that information infrastructure, because information drives the whole business. For that specific client, we're working with the executives there, and they have a big vision. They want to grow. They want to be a big player, or they are a big player, but they want to be the biggest player in their region. So there's no way around that. You can buy a bunch of other subsidiaries, you can acquire and other companies, but if you don't have a common, let's say, consolidated operating model, you have different streams of planning. There are different levels of planning that you have to go through in an organization. You have to set those up, because those are the right gates that an integrated business platform should follow. So they are really invested in developing those kind of systems there.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That makes total sense. Are there any differences in terms of how clients in Asia Pacific interact with consultants, or how they view consultants compared to other parts of the world? In other words, is there a more favorable or less favorable view of consultants? Are they more dependent or less dependent on consultants than other parts of the world, or is it sort of a just case by case basis?
I think it's case by case uh, basis. Uh, well, you know, when you spend time with a client, and let's say it's a long term relationship. Let's say a couple, it could be a 2 or 3 years relationship. Sometimes the client uh, sees you as actually an employee, not an employee, but part of the actual company, and sort of they're expecting you to to get the work done, like if you're part of that actual part of that organization. Um, so that's interesting when you get into those uh, dynamics. Um, but I would say it's case by case, right? Of course, you have clients that are more demanding than than others. Um, but that's the beauty of being a consultant, right? You're working with different organizations, you're working with different cultures, you're working with different teams, and you learn a lot from all of those different cases. So that's one of the benefits I feel about consultant. And at the end of the day is you have, regardless of how much work you put in, the client needs to be happy what you're providing them, and they see the light at the end of the tunnel, from the engagement, and then they can start thinking about the next steps. You've provided that foundation, you've provided the right starting point, and I think that's the key thing, is providing that right starting point for them so they can build on it, and then they can add those other additional steps uh, on their own, if they decide to take on the project without you later on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. What for you has been the most challenging and rewarding project that you've been involved with so far, whether it's as part of third stage or even earlier in your career? What's been an example of your favorite or one of your favorites?
Well, the most challenging and also the most rewarding engagement was when I was in Bangladesh. I was actually I had one foot as a consultant and one foot as an actual member of the organization, and it was a textile organization. I spent 5 years there. The managing director of the company, when I stepped in, I asked him, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "I want an ERP." I'm like, "All right, okay, I'll get that rolling for you." But I didn't just jump in and look for a system right away. I had to, review the organizational structure, look at the capabilities of the workforce, set up their planning systems, and so forth. Build that digital mindset, build that sensitivity to information, and it took a while to get that going in order for an ERP to really come in and really start crystallizing what we're doing in setting up the processes and all that, and going and being in Bangladesh. So it was a new country for me, a new culture for me. It was, and I lived there for a number of years, and also working six days a week there, because they only had Saturday off. So I had to work 6 days a week for 7 years. So it was really tiring, but it was really rewarding. And it's been several years now. I left Bangladesh, but I still get a lot of uh, great feedback, a lot of comments, a lot of nice words from my past colleagues, and how much they cherish the time we work together, brainstorm together, um, and all that. So it has Bangladesh has a really soft spot for me, and yeah, I'm looking forward to go back one day and and see everyone there.
I was just going to ask you that. Have you been back to Bangladesh since you were working there?
No, been almost 4 years, but hopefully after this COVID situation, maybe I'll take a flight and say hi to everyone there. Looking forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how working in another country can create that soft spot that you mentioned. I have a few of those as well, including in parts of Asia Pacific and Africa. I mean, there's still places that I've worked that I kind of miss. Like I want to go back to, especially since a lot of us haven't been traveling much during COVID. So I agree with that. Uh, Here's a general question. I guess this is something I think is very relevant across the world. I don't think this is at all specific to Asia Pacific, but this is for another question from Nav on LinkedIn. He says, how do you best mitigate delays in an ERP implementation or launch? What are some of the general best practices? Certainly, if you have anything that's unique to Asia Pacific or you think is especially important in Asia Pacific, that would be interesting too. But I imagine a lot of things you might think of are global in nature.
Top of mind, the best way to eliminate delays is don't sign the contract with your system integrator and your ERP vendor if you're not ready.
Nice.
That's the only way I can put it in like if it was the top of the list. Just don't jump into a contract right away if you're if you don't have the right people yet. You still have to hire your planners, you still have to hire key roles in your organization. If your information structure isn't robust enough, you have to improve how you set up your bombs, your item masters, all your master data. Those are all the things, all the analysis that you can do before actual system integrator comes in, or an ERP vendor comes in. And it's worth, let's say, hiring someone from outside, a third party, a consultant, to come in to help you get that set up. But don't jump in and sign a contract, because once you sign the contract, unfortunately you're trapped, and it's hard to get out of it. So do as much as you can to before signing the contract, and at the end, maybe you'll get pressure from your colleagues. Where is this ERP? How come, we've been hearing about it for months. How come the ERP consultants are not here yet? But you have to make them understand there's a lot of homework and there's a lot of setup that can be done beforehand.
Right. And one cultural nuance that you've actually helped educate me on is within the region, within Asia Pacific, is that maybe more of a propensity to want to have more preparation than maybe other parts of the world. Other parts of the world might be a little bit more comfortable with ambiguity or not having a plan, not having structure. But from what I understand from working with you and others in the region, it seems like structure and preparation is even more important in that part of the world. And so that further goes to your point, which is if you go straight to signing the contract and then you just start building stuff, you're not ready, you're not prepared, you don't have the structure, you don't have the governance in place, you don't have the processes in place, everything you need to be successful. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I think that the whole organization, before you embark on your digital transformation or your ERP implementation, everybody should be on the same level playing field in the organization. And one key part is having that common knowledge on best practices understood throughout the organization. Top down, it needs to be understood. Because once you set up that common knowledge, which ties everyone together and everyone's basically singing from the same song sheet, regardless if this song sheet is simple or complicated. But if it's simple, it's great. But at least everyone can always draw back from those same principles, basically, from that same common knowledge. So it's building that common knowledge in your organization first before you start, implementing any technology. So it's a learning process internally for the organization, to before you start setting up an ERP and spending a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. And that's good advice for any project team in any part of the world, I would say. I have one more question for you before I ask my last question for you. I wanted to cover this one question. It is actually better stated than the way I framed it. It's a little bit more specific than a similar question I asked you earlier. And this is from LinkedIn. And the question is, do developing countries prefer an on-premise or cloud-based ERP? And maybe not just developing, but just in Asia Pacific in general, do you see a difference in cloud adoption versus on-premise adoption? I know in general across the world, things are migrating more towards cloud, but we're not 100% of the way there yet in terms of full-on cloud adoption across all enterprises and all technologies. So what are your thoughts on this cloud versus on-premise as it relates to your region?
I would say the biggest factor why organizations would decide to either go on premise or on cloud is their how good is their internet connection.
Right.
I mean, if we're talking about developing countries, you need to have a stable internet connection. Your internet providers need to be reliable. So that's a key thing. And talking about the our project in Papua New Guinea, internet connection is a big thing. It's a big deal. So that's why they decide to use an on-premise solution. Me personally, I don't have any bias or any preferences between on cloud or on-premise solutions. I think it's just about do you have the infrastructure, IT infrastructure in your environment, in your region to support an on-cloud system.
Yeah, and then along the same lines, I haven't seen this as often in Asia Pacific as I have in other parts of the world, like in Africa, for example. But one thing to be aware of too, in addition to internet connectivity, is also just power reliability. One thing that we see, in, like I said, in Africa, you get planned outages where they're trying to load balance the grid, basically the electrical grid,
Yeah.
and they'll take down power for hours at a time. And I guess that's a problem whether you're on premise or cloud. That creates a disruption to everyone's lives and businesses in general. But that certainly could affect cloud adoption as well, I would think. If you don't have internet or power or reliable internet or power, that could be a challenge as well.
Yeah. Well, then you have to get into the electricity business and set up your own generator.
Right.
And that's what happens in countries like Bangladesh. The company where I was working, they were setting up because they had so many outages throughout the day. The founder decided to build a mini plant, electricity plant beside his factory in order to just supply electricity for his operations.
It's not a bad idea, depending on where you are, for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm sure he made the cost benefit analysis and it made sense for him.
Yeah, I could imagine because that's got to be disruptive. If you lose power for a couple hours, that could be extremely disruptive. What about? So my last question for you then is what advice would you have for someone that's about to get started on their digital transformation? What's sort of the general advice you'd give for someone or a team that's about to get started?
We talked earlier about building that common knowledge, setting up the basics, the management best practices. That's, in my opinion, that's the first thing you have to do. This digital transformation is making sure that you're actually doing the right things, the basics, right. And I would preach for company executives, team leaders, managers, and so forth, to inspire and to encourage their employees, their functional teams, their managers to get training, right? Certification on key parts of the processes of how to properly run the key processes for, let's say, for an ERP, for example. So I come from a bit of a manufacturing background and a supply chain background. And I'm a big believer of, let's say, certification, like supply chain certification. I did the Apic certification. I don't know if anyone knows about it, but it's the Association of Operations Management back in the US, and they have really good training material to certify you in supply chain management, in lean manufacturing, in inventory control, and so forth. And I would preach for companies to learn, to have employees, you know, to get that kind of certification, to get that kind of knowledge, because that's going to allow the company to blossom properly for the long term. And when it comes down to implementing digital transformation and bringing in digital transformation consultants and ERP consultants, system integrators, and so forth, they will have the same level playing field with as the consultants, and then they can work off each other. The worst thing that could happen, well, not the worst thing, but what you want to avoid is having consultants, oh, this is what you have to do, because that's what the system requires you to do it some way. But you need to have that other piece where, well, no, well, there's there's also another side to the coin to that. There's we do it in this way, but we're also following the best practice way. And once you follow the best practice way, that the solution will be able to adjust to it, no problem.
Right. Right.
So it's building that internal competency within the organization before you dive into your digital transformation initiative.
Yeah, that's great advice, because I think a lot of times organizations get stuck with the need or the perceived need to bring in outside experts, which you do need some of that, but you don't want to become so dependent on the outside experts that you're not self-sufficient and you can't get rid of them. I mean, the whole point of you and I being consultants to organizations is we're good at coming in and doing what we're good at, but you don't want us around for a long time. As much as we might like each other, you like working with someone, you want it to be a very targeted role, and you can't do that if you're not building that competency in-house. It's a lot harder to execute on that.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I want to thank you for being here today. I would say I would love to say goodbye to the audience or say some closing words in Mandarin, but the only phrase I can recall from my time in Asia in Mandarin is "谢谢." Is that how you say thank you? Is it "谢谢"?
Yeah, that's right. You got it right.
How do you pronounce? I want to hear you say it though, just because I feel like you'll say it better than I did.
Well, you say 谢谢大家, so thank you everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you for being here today. How can the audience get a hold of you if they're in Asia Pacific and they want to talk to you about their digital transformations or their transformation needs? What are some of the ways they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can get hold of me. The best way would be by email. So my email is dean, DEAN .sam, SAM at thirdstage-consulting.com. So dean.sam, thirdstage-consulting.com. Yeah, if please do share about your ERP plans, and I'll be happy to try to help you out in any way possible, and see any opportunities. And so I'm based out of Hong Kong. I have a colleague called Wayne based out of Brisbane in Australia, and together we work and cater to the Asia Pacific region. So looking forward to hearing from all of you.
Yeah, great. That's great. And we're dropping your email address in the chat or in the comments field below on the different platforms you're streaming to. So be sure to check that out. If you missed that email that the Dean verbalized, we'll have it in the comments section below. So be sure to check that out. And they can also follow you on LinkedIn, I assume. I know you. That's how you and I connected, was on LinkedIn. So that's how people can find you. Can they just search Dean? Is that the best way to search you up, or is there a
just search me up. We're on LinkedIn, and please let's connect on LinkedIn. Like Eric said, that's the way we connected, and it's just a great platform.
Yep, it is. It's another reminder of what a small world it is. So, well, good. Well, thanks for being here, Dean. Really appreciate it, especially early in the morning your time, and We started this at 7 a.m. your time in Hong Kong, and those of you listening in Asia Pacific, it's pretty early. So hopefully, I would certainly appreciate you joining this early. And if you have colleagues that might be interested in this conversation, I encourage you to share it with your colleagues. They can watch it on demand after the fact. And also, we are going to make this this interview will become part of my Transformation Ground Control podcast, which comes out every Wednesday. You can find new episodes on all the audio podcast platforms, as well as Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. So be sure to check that out as well. You'll see this interview show up here in the next couple of weeks on that podcast. But in the meantime, I want to thank everyone for their time. Thank you again, Dean, and we will look forward to seeing you on our next live stream. Have a great day in the meantime.
Thanks, Eric. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you. You too. You too. Bye.